He sat alone on his porch, watching snow fall quietly, yet inside that small cabin, a storm was just beginning. Sometimes the quietest moments hide the loudest stories. If you're drawn to tales of resilience, unexpected family, and the kind of hope that grows slowly, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, if you enjoy heartfelt stories like this, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps us bring more stories your way. No pressure, just a warm welcome whenever you're ready. The first thing you hear is static, not the kind from a broken machine, the kind that fills empty rooms. Inside a cluttered repair shop, an old wooden sign hangs crooked by the window. The paint is faded, but you can still read it. Marlowe Repairs. If it's worth keeping, it's worth fixing. A pair of rough hands turns the dial on a battered Zenith radio. Click. Nothing. Twist. More static. Fingers tap the side, knuckles calloused, nails worn down. Hank Marlowe sits hunched over his workbench, mid-40s, flannel shirt, denim apron streaked with grease. His beard is salt and pepper, more salt these days. He doesn't look old, but he looks weathered, like something left out in the sun too long, but still holding together. He squints through his wire-rimmed glasses, grabs a screwdriver, and pops open the back panel of the radio. Dust spills out like it's been holding its breath for a decade. Laid out like a war zone, he mutters. On the shelves behind him, rows of forgotten things. Typewriters, cassette players, alarm clocks with numbers that no longer glow, all waiting. The rain taps steadily against the windows, not a gentle sound, a hard, rhythmic knock like someone impatient but polite. Hank leans in closer. The hum of a soldering iron fills the silence. He works slow, steady. His hands know this rhythm better than anything else in his life. A capacitor clicks loose. A wire frays beneath his touch. He sighs, long and low, reaches for the coffee mug next to him. Cold, like always. From the corner of the shop, a pendulum clock ticks loud. It's the only sound that never leaves. He glances toward the window. The sky hangs low, sagging with gray clouds. The town of Greystone barely stirs. Just empty streets, wet pavement, and a gas station 2 blocks down, whose neon sign keeps flickering between open and opie. He doesn't get many customers out here. Hasn't for years. But the sign stays up. The doors stay open. Because Hank Marlowe fixes broken things. He doesn't say it out loud, but it's written in the way his hands move, like he believes some things deserve a second chance. A buzz, then silence. He flips a switch. The radio coughs, then dies again. "Come on," he whispers. "Not today." His thumb brushes against a small engraving on the side of the radio. "For Ellie, Christmas 1967. He lets out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Yeah, I get it," he says quietly. Across the room, a battered baby crib leans against the wall, covered in a tarp. Next to it, an old guitar with 3 strings, a cracked lamp. This isn't just a repair shop, it's a museum for things that once mattered. A sharp ping snaps his focus back. A wire snaps free from the board. Hank drops the pliers, presses his fingers to his forehead. Damn it! For a moment he just sits there, shoulders slumped, hands idle, the weight of something heavier than broken circuits pressing down. Then the clock chimes. 5 sharp bells, end of the day. Not that it matters. Hank stands, stretches his back. Bones pop. He walks to the window, watches the rain thicken. Out there, the mountains loom like old gods, their heads lost in fog. "Storm's coming," he mutters. "Big one." His gaze shifts to the empty street, then to the cabin in the distance. His cabin, small, wood-stained. A single porch light flickers against the wind. That's home. Not because it's warm, not because it's full, but because it's still standing, just like him. Hank grabs his coat, switches off the shop lights. But as he reaches for the door, the radio, a sudden crackle, not loud, barely there, a whisper through static. He freezes, turns, walks back, click. He tunes the dial. The noise sharpens, flickers, then drops into silence. He waits. Nothing, just static. But for half a second, something was there. A voice, a signal, or maybe just the sound of something breaking. Either way, Hank knows storms don't always come from the sky. The rain follows him home, not gentle now. It hits sideways, slanting through the trees like sheets of glass. The cabin stands at the edge of the woods, small, weathered. A porch light flickers in protest against the wind, but it holds. Hank kicks mud from his boots, pushes the door open. The hinges creak, same sound every night. Inside, warmth waits. But just barely, a wood stove hums, throwing weak heat into the single-room space. On the far side, a rough-hewn kitchen, 2 chairs, 1 table. Ruby sits there, 9 years old, face half hidden behind a paperback missing its cover. Her hair's tied back in a knot that's starting to fall apart. She doesn't look up when the door opens. Doesn't need to. "You're late," she says, still reading. "Radio fought back," Hank answers, dropping his coat on a nail by the door. "Lost this round." Ruby doesn't smile, doesn't frown, just flips a page. Dinner is already on the table. 2 bowls of canned tomato soup. 2 slices of dry bread. She said it without asking. A quiet rhythm they both know by heart. Hank sits, grabs his spoon. For a moment neither of them speak. Only the sound of rain on the tin roof, and the occasional groan of wood shifting under wind. Above them, a crack snakes across the ceiling. Thin, but growing. Another winter, maybe 2, and it won't hold. Hank's eyes drift to the mantel resting there. A hunting knife. Blade still sharp, handle worn smooth from years of work, but it's not the tool that holds his gaze, it's what's carved into the handle. Fix what you can. He made that years ago, back when Ellie was alive, when the world felt repairable. "Did the clock stop again?" Ruby asks. Hank blinks back. "Yeah, needs rewiring. You say that every week." He exhales, stirs his soup, watches the swirl of red fade into orange along the spoon's curve. Ruby finally puts the book down, eyes him carefully. Not like a child watching a parent, more like someone inspecting a familiar crack in a wall, wondering if this time it'll split open. "Storm's getting worse," she says, voice steady, almost too steady for 9. "Yeah, gonna get ugly by morning." A pause. She tears a piece of bread, dips it. "Cabin'll hold?" Hank answers before thinking. Always does. But both of them look, instinctively, toward that line on the ceiling, and they both know. Silence again. Not awkward, just full of things unsaid. Hank pushes his chair back, walks to the mantel. Fingers trace the carved words on the knife. His thumb runs over the grain, the dents, the history. "Dad," Ruby says softly, "when's the last time you fixed something for yourself?" He doesn't answer, not right away, just lets his hand close around the handle. There's a draft from the window, another seal gone loose, another thing waiting for a pair of hands that still have enough strength and enough reason to care. The wind rattles the pane. The porch light flickers once, then steadies. Hank turns, meets his daughter's eyes. The smallest smile tugs at the corner of his mouth. "Eat your soup," he says. "It's gonna be a long night." Ruby picks the bread back up, doesn't smile, but she doesn't look away either. Outside, the trees bend, the sky holds its breath. And inside, beneath a roof lined with old scars and fresh leaks, two people eat dinner, quiet, together, a family, even if neither of them says it out loud. The cabin is quiet now. The storm outside has settled into a steady rhythm of rain against the roof. Hank sits by the radio, the same one he'd tried to fix all day. Its wooden case is scratched and worn, the dial barely holding its numbers. He turns the knob slowly, listening. Static. The familiar crackle of white noise filling the small room. Then, something different. A faint pulse, like a heartbeat breaking through the static. Hank leans closer, the hair on the back of his neck prickles, the radio coughs and sputters, a voice. So faint it might have been the wind. Help! The word is broken, stretched thin, barely a whisper. Hank's eyes widen, he turns the dial, searching. More static. Then the voice again. Here. It's fractured, distant, like someone trapped inside a storm. He reaches for the radio's power switch, toggles it off, then back on. The static swells. Then silence. He waits, heart pounding in the quiet room. The voice returns. Please. A child's voice this time, fragile and scared. Hank's hand tightens on the radio's edge. He sits back, breathing slow. This isn't just interference. It's a call. He reaches for his coat hanging by the door, but pauses. Outside, the wind picks up again, rattling the windows. He looks toward the dim porch light, fighting the shadows. His mind races through every story he's heard: lost hikers, stranded travelers, old legends whispered in this mountain town. But something about that voice. It feels close, not miles away. Hank pulls on his boots, his eyes never leaving the radio. A second whisper, barely audible. Need help. He doesn't hesitate. Grabbing his flashlight, he steps out into the cold night, the storm wrapping around him like a living thing. The radio's voice fades behind the howl of wind, but Hank knows. This night, something is waiting to be found. The storm had arrived with a quiet fury. Snowflakes tumbled like ash from a dying fire, blanketing the world in muffled white. Hank pulled his coat tighter, the worn leather creaking as he slung a weathered backpack over his shoulder. The old radio crackled softly in his hand, a fragile beacon struggling against the storm. His boots sank deep into the drifts as he stepped onto the narrow forest trail, barely visible beneath the fresh snow. Trees loomed tall, their branches bowed under the weight of the frozen storm like ancient sentinels watching silently. The wind howled low and mournful, carrying whispers that seemed both distant and urgent. Hank paused, scanning the shadowed woods. The radio's voice crackled again, faint but unmistakable. Help. Need. Please. Each step forward felt heavier, as if the snow wanted to swallow him whole. The beam from his flashlight cut a thin slice through the swirling storm, illuminating only the next few feet. Then nothing but white oblivion beyond. His breath came out in steady clouds, misting and vanishing instantly. The cold bit deep into his bones, but he ignored it. There was no turning back. The trail curved sharply to the left, marked only by broken branches and the faintest trace of tire tracks half covered in snow. Hank's fingers brushed against the radio's knob, adjusting the frequency, chasing the broken signal like a moth to a distant flame. Memories flickered through his mind. His wife's laugh, the small hand of his daughter Ruby in his, the quiet moments in this very forest when life had seemed simpler, softer. But those days were gone. Now all that mattered was what lay ahead. Suddenly, through the swirling white, a faint glow appeared. Smoke, a thin wisp rising above the snow-laden trees, twisting toward the gray sky. Hank's heart quickened. He moved faster, boots crunching over brittle branches hidden beneath the snow. The radio sputtered again, clearer this time. Please, help! The wind seemed to hold its breath as he approached the source. A small cabin, half buried, its roof sagging under the snow's weight. The front door hung crooked, swinging gently with the wind's breath. Smoke curled weakly from a rusted metal chimney, the only sign of life in the frozen wilderness. Hank hesitated at the threshold, the radio tucked close to his chest. The voices were real. Someone was here. Inside, the air was sharp with cold, frost clinging to the windows like frozen tears. And there, curled in a corner, was a woman. Her hair plastered with snow, arms wrapped tightly around two tiny bundles swaddled in threadbare blankets. One of the babies stirred, a fragile cry breaking the silence. Hank stepped inside, closing the door against the storm. He lowered his voice, gentle but firm. "I'm here to help. You're safe now." The storm outside raged, but inside that cabin, a fragile warmth had begun. The crunch of Hank's boots on snow-covered twigs echoed softly in the frozen silence. A head nestled beneath heavy boughs weighed down by ice. A dark shape struggled against the storm. A pickup truck half buried in snow, its tires spinning uselessly in the frozen mud. The driver's door hung open, creaking as the wind slipped inside. Hank approached cautiously, the radio's faint static whispering in his coat pocket. Inside the cab, the faint flicker of a dying flashlight cast trembling shadows. Then he saw her. A woman barely more than a girl, with pale skin flushed by cold and exhaustion. She was cradling two tiny bundles wrapped tightly in tattered blankets close to her chest like precious treasures. Her breath came in ragged gasps, cheeks stained with frozen tears. "Please," she whispered, voice raw and desperate. "Help them." Hank didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, arms steady despite the biting wind. The woman looked up, eyes wide with disbelief and relief. "I didn't know if anyone would come," she said, shivering. The babies stirred, weak cries breaking the stillness. One coughing, small and raspy, cutting through the cold air like a fragile plea. Hank reached in, lifting the smallest bundle gently, feeling the faint pulse of life against his palm. His own heart tightened. "Let's get you out of here," he said quietly. Outside, the storm pressed harder, snowflakes stinging like needles. Hank wrapped his heavy coat around Mara and the children, pulling them close. The trail back was a blur of white, the world reduced to shapes and shadows. Each step was a battle feet sinking, muscles aching, but he didn't stop. Behind them, the truck lay abandoned, silent in the growing storm. Inside his chest, something stirred. Hope. The snow fell harder now, thick, relentless, swallowing the world whole. Hank's breath came in ragged clouds as he trudged through the white haze, his arms wrapped tight around Mara and the two newborns. The smaller of the babies coughed, a harsh, rasping sound that sliced through the biting cold. Hank's heart clenched. Every step was a fight. The snow clung to his boots, dragging him down. The wind whipped his face, fierce and unforgiving, but he couldn't stop. Behind him, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Branches sagged under snow's weight, silent witnesses to their desperate journey. Mara leaned weakly against Hank's shoulder, shivering beneath the heavy coat he'd wrapped around them all. Her eyes fluttered, exhaustion shadowing their brightness. "I can't," she whispered, voice thin. "Yes, you can," Hank said, voice low but steady. "We're almost there." He focused on the dim outline of the cabin through the storm, a small promise of warmth, safety. The porch light flickered faintly like a distant star. Ruby's old cabin, their only refuge. The baby coughed again. Hank's pace quickened despite aching muscles. Memories surged, the smell of pine, the crackle of firewood, the softness of a child's hand in his. He refused to let those memories fade. Not now. They reached the porch at last. Hank fumbled with the door, cold fingers trembling. Inside, the air was sharp with cold, frost clinging to windows like frozen lace. He set Mara gently on the worn couch, careful not to jostle the babies. The smaller infant's eyes fluttered, weak, but alive. Hank pulled a blanket from the chair, tucking them all in. Mara's breath slowed, steadied. Hank sank into a chair beside them, rubbing his hands together. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, fragile warmth began to grow. The cabin felt impossibly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and settles there. Hank moved quickly, his hands, rough and steady, grabbed whatever he could find. Dry twigs, old newspapers, forgotten kindling stacked by the stove. He knelt by the wood stove, lighting a match with a flick that trembled only slightly. The flame caught, shaky at first. He fed it carefully, blowing gently, coaxing the fire to life. The warmth spread slowly, chasing back the icy fingers crawling across the cabin floor. Mara lay on the couch, pale and barely conscious. One of the babies, the smaller one, coughed weakly, its tiny chest rising and falling unevenly. Hank's gaze locked on the infant. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small bottle of warm water he'd heated earlier. Gently, he dampened a cloth and wiped the baby's face, soothing as best he could. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine. Ruby, Hank's daughter, appeared quietly in the doorway, clutching a threadbare blanket. Without a word, she knelt beside her father, helping him wrap the baby snugly. Outside, the storm howled like a wild beast, rattling the windows and bending the tree. Inside, the fire crackled, a fragile shield against the night. Hank looked toward Mara, her breathing shallow but steady. He lifted her hand, warm despite the cold. "Stay with us," he whispered. Minutes stretched like hours. The babies stirred, then both cried softly, a sound that was both relief and worry. Hank stood and moved to the small kitchen table, grabbing a flask of formula Mara had managed to pack. He fed the babies slowly, careful with every drop. Ruby hummed a quiet tune, the melody wavering but comforting. The cabin, though small and battered, began to feel like a sanctuary, a place where broken things might be mended. Hank looked around the room, the cracked windows, the worn floorboards, the chipped paint on the walls. It wasn't much. But it was home, and tonight it would have to be enough. The fire's glow softened the sharp edges of the cabin. Outside, the storm had quieted, but inside, a fragile stillness settled. Mara's eyes fluttered open, slow and uncertain, as if waking from a long, cold dream. Her gaze drifted around the room, faint outlines of furniture. The flicker of shadows against wooden walls. She tried to move but found herself heavy, limbs like lead. A quiet cough escaped her lips, then a deeper breath. She felt warmth wrapped around her thick fabric, the scent of pine and smoke. Her eyes settled on Hank, sitting nearby, watching her with quiet concern. For a moment she didn't speak. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she asked, "Where am I?" Hank's voice was calm, gentle. "You're safe, inside my cabin." She blinked, confusion knitting her brow. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air like fragile glass. Hank hesitated, then answered simply, "I'm Hank. I found you out there. You and the babies." Her eyes flicked to the bundles sleeping soundly in the makeshift cradle. I don't remember." Tears gathered unbidden, wetting the corners of her eyes. "Where's my car? My things?" Hank shook his head slowly. "The truck's stuck. You were in trouble." She swallowed hard, the weight of it pressing down. Fear softened her features, shadows of panic lurking beneath exhaustion. "Why did you come? Why did you help me?" Hank looked away briefly, then back. "Because no one should be left out in the cold." Her breath hitched, eyes searching his face for something. trust maybe, or hope. But all Hank could offer was steady patience. She shifted slightly, wincing, the pain of the night settling into her bones. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said quietly. "That's okay," Hank replied. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." Outside, a single gust rattled the window pane. Inside, Mara's shoulders relaxed just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire. Hank moved slowly, carefully, his hands steady despite the exhaustion pulling at his bones. In the corner, an old wooden bed frame stood folded against the wall. Ruby's childhood bed. He pulled it free, the wood creaking under years of neglect. Using a worn blanket and some scraps of fabric, Hank fashioned a makeshift crib. He lined it with the softest blankets he could find. Faded flannel, a threadbare quilt, anything to keep the babies warm. Ruby watched silently from the doorway, eyes wide and still uncertain. Hank placed the two infants side by side, tucking the blankets snugly around their tiny forms. Their breaths were shallow but steady, fragile promises in the quiet room. He looked up at Mara, who sat wrapped in a thick sweater, her eyes tired but watching. The night stretched long and slow. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, snow piling thick against the cabin walls. Inside, the three of them sat close, sharing the warmth they could. Ruby crawled over, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from one baby's face. Hank smiled softly, a rare break in his weathered expression. "Looks like we're stuck with each other for a while," he said quietly. Mara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "As long as we're together." The fire's glow cast dancing shadows on the walls, a fragile light against the dark. Hank settled into his chair, eyes heavy but alert. He listened to the quiet breathing of the babies, the soft sighs from Mara, and the steady rhythm of Ruby's heartbeat nearby. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, for the first time in a long while, there was hope. A home, a chance, and a family beginning to form. The morning light filtered weakly through frost-covered windows, casting pale patterns on the cabin floor. Mara sat by the small wooden table, her fingers tracing the grain absently. The babies slept quietly nearby, bundled safely in their makeshift crib. Hank poured 2 cups of weak coffee, setting one in front of her without a word. She took it, cradling the warm mug between trembling hands. For a long moment, silence hung between them, thick, uneasy. Then Mara exhaled slowly, gathering the courage to speak. "My life hasn't been easy." She looked up, eyes meeting Hank's steady gaze. "I was left alone before, not like this, but still alone." Her voice was soft, cracked in places, a quiet fracture in the calm. "I had someone, Evan." The name hung heavy. A man who said he'd stay, who promised to be there. Her hands clenched tightly around the mug. "But when I told him I was pregnant, everything changed." Her eyes darkened. "He left, said he wasn't ready, that I should figure it out." Hank listened, his jaw tightening but his voice gentle. "I didn't have family to turn to, no one to help. So I drove," she continued, voice breaking slightly, "just trying to get away from the memories, from the silence. The car broke down near here. I thought maybe the storm would take me." Her breath caught. "But then I found the cabin, and then you." Hank nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. "None of that was your fault," he said quietly. "You're here now, and we'll take it one day at a time." Mara's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were not just for pain. They were for something new, something fragile and real. Hope. Ruby sat silently by the window, watching the snow swirl outside like restless ghosts. Her fingers toyed absently with a small silver bracelet, delicate, worn, the last piece of her mother's jewelry. It was the only thing Ruby had left of Ellie, her mother who had passed years ago. The bracelet's cold metal pressed against her skin, a constant reminder of loss and love tangled together. She clenched her jaw as Mara spoke quietly in the next room, her voice weaving stories of abandonment and broken promises. Anger bubbled inside Ruby like a storm about to break. How could someone just give up? How could anyone leave babies alone in the world? She stood abruptly, the bracelet slipping from her wrist onto the wooden floor with a soft clink. The sound seemed loud in the stillness. Ruby's steps echoed as she paced the cabin, thoughts spinning faster than the snow outside. Her eyes flashed with hurt, a silent scream against the unfairness of it all. But then she stopped. Her gaze fell on the bracelet lying on the floor, its surface catching the dim light. Slowly she bent down and picked it up. Fingers tracing the delicate clasp, she remembered the small hands that had once fastened it on her wrist. The warmth of her mother's love, steady and unbreakable even now. Ruby took a deep breath and walked to the couch where Mara sat quietly watching. She knelt down beside her, holding out the bracelet. "I want you to have this," Ruby said softly. Mara's eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. Ruby's voice trembled just slightly. "It's the only thing I have left of my mom. Maybe it can be a little piece of hope for you." Mara accepted the bracelet, fingers brushing Ruby's. A fragile connection formed between them, not just of loss, but of healing. Ruby smiled, the first genuine smile in days. "Maybe we can be a family," she whispered. Outside, the snow continued to fall, softer now, as if the world itself was listening. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the frost-streaked window panes, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Hank knelt beside the wooden crib he had hastily assembled days before, a patchwork of old wood, sanded smooth but still rough to the touch. His hands worked carefully, tightening loose joints and smoothing splintered edges, every movement deliberate and steady. Nearby, the old radio sat silent, its worn case cracked in places, the dial frozen between static and signal. Hank glanced over at it, his eyes lingering longer than necessary. The radio had been his companion during many lonely nights, a voice in the void, a thread connecting him to a world beyond the snow and silence. Now it was a symbol of waiting, waiting for a message, waiting for something or someone to break through the static. The cabin was quiet, but the silence was heavy, filled with things unsaid. Ruby played quietly in the corner, stacking wooden blocks with a concentration that made her seem older than her years. Mara rested on the worn couch, her eyes closed but her breathing calm. Hank took a deep breath, letting the stillness settle around him like a shroud. He adjusted the blankets in the crib, smoothing the fabric with a gentleness that surprised even himself. Outside, the wind whispered against the walls, a soft murmur like a distant memory. Hank's fingers brushed a small scratch on the radio's surface, a reminder of a night not long ago when the faintest voice had come through, fragile and broken. He thought of Mara, of the babies, of the fragile family forming in this weathered cabin. The silence wasn't empty, it was waiting, waiting for healing, for hope, for a future they couldn't yet see. Hank stood slowly, eyes still fixed on the radio. The world outside was still harsh, but inside, something was beginning to take root. A quiet promise, and in that moment Hank felt it, a fragile peace wrapped in the soft glow of a fire that refused to die. The wind returned with a vengeance, a savage howl that tore through the night like a living thing. Snow whipped against the cabin's thin walls, drumming relentlessly. Inside, The small room was lit only by the flickering glow of a single lantern. The flame danced uncertainly, casting shadows that stretched and recoiled. Hank sat by the stove, the fire sputtering under the storm's assault. His eyes were tired but watchful. Mara cradled one of the babies, her body shivering despite layers of blankets. Ruby sat close, clutching the worn silver bracelet tightly in her small hands. Outside, the storm's fury threatened to erase the world beyond these four walls. The cabin creaked and groaned, its frame protesting against the weight of snow and wind. Each gust sounded like a knock on the door, a reminder that safety was fragile. Hank rose slowly, moving to check the windows. Frost had begun to creep along the edges of the glass, blurring the view. He sealed gaps with old cloth and tape, his fingers numb but precise. The children watched him, their faces pale but trusting. "We'll get through this," Hank said softly. His voice was steady, though inside the fear lingered. A sudden gust slammed the door, making the lantern flicker wildly. The room plunged into near darkness for a heartbeat, then light returned. Mara squeezed the baby tighter, humming a quiet lullaby. Ruby's eyes fluttered closed. Hank returned to the stove, adding wood carefully, coaxing the fire back to life. The warmth spread slowly, a fragile shield against the storm's rage. Outside, the world was buried beneath white silence. Inside, the cabin held them safe. For now, the storm raged on outside, relentless and unforgiving. Inside the cabin, the rhythm was different, slow, deliberate, filled with quiet understanding. Mara sat in the rocking chair, gently rocking one of the babies to sleep. Her hands moved with a tenderness born from exhaustion and fierce love. Hank sat nearby, eyes closed briefly, gathering strength for the night ahead. When Mara's shoulders sagged with weariness, Hank rose without a word. He took the sleeping baby carefully, settling into the chair. Mara moved to the stove, stirring a pot of warming broth, the steam rising like a soft promise. They didn't speak much. Words felt unnecessary, sometimes even too heavy. Instead, they shared glances, small, meaningful, a slight nod, a tightened hand around a cup, a breath held, then released. Ruby lay wrapped in a blanket on the floor, watching them with quiet eyes. She understood the weight in the silence, not loneliness, but a shared battle, a mutual determination. Hank reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Mara's face. She smiled faintly. "No words needed," she whispered. "Just being here is enough." The fire crackled, steady and warm. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, a fragile peace settled. A family uneasy but united. The storm had softened outside. Snowflakes drifted lazily, no longer sharp or wild. Inside the cabin, the fire's glow cast a warm amber light over the worn wooden table. Mara sat across from Hank, a small, carefully wrapped bundle resting in her hands. She hesitated, then unfolded it slowly. Inside lay an old silver spoon, delicate, its surface etched with tiny, faded initials. Hank's eyes met hers, puzzled but attentive. "This belonged to my mother," Mara said quietly. "She gave it to me when I was born." The spoon was more than metal. It was history, memory, love passed down through generations. Hank reached out, taking it gently. His fingers brushed the cool surface, tracing the faded letters. "I want you to have it," Mara continued, voice barely above a whisper. "For all you've done, for saving us." Hank looked up, eyes glistening. He felt the weight of the gesture, not just the object, but the trust it carried. He nodded slowly, carefully placing the spoon in his coat pocket. A silence settled between them, thick and tender. Ruby entered quietly, clutching a small bundle of firewood. She stopped, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Hank smiled softly at her. "It's not much," he said, voice low, but it means everything. Mara's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. The moment was fragile, like the flame flickering beside them, but in that fragility there was strength, a quiet promise. That despite everything, they were no longer alone. The world had changed overnight. A thick blanket of snow covered every branch, every rock, every inch of the ground outside the cabin. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hushed, pristine silence. Hank stepped onto the porch, boots crunching in the fresh powder. His breath formed soft clouds in the cold morning air. He looked out over the endless white, the trees heavy with snow. The cabin's chimney sent up a steady ribbon of smoke, a sign of warmth, life, survival. Inside, Mara was already awake, gently rocking one of the babies. Ruby sat nearby, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, eyes sparkling with something new, joy. The baby stirred, tiny fists twitching against soft blankets. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't in weeks. Mara smiled as Ruby's laughter broke the quiet. It was light, fragile, but real. A sound that reached deep, chasing away the weight of fear. Outside, the sky was a pale blue, the sun low but shining through the frosted branches. Hank took a deep breath and stepped back inside. He watched the small family, a mother, a father, a chud, and two newborns beginning again. The storm had taken much, but it had not taken their hope. The laughter grew, spreading warmth like the fire that crackled in the hearth. For the first time in a long time, the future felt possible, bright, open. The morning sun warmed the road as Hank drove the old pickup truck toward town. Snow still blanketed the ground, glistening like crushed glass in the light. Mara sat quietly beside him, bundled in layers but still shivering. Her eyes flicked toward the passing trees, then back to the road. The truck's engine hummed, steady and comforting. Hank stole a glance at her. "So," he began, voice calm, "do you have family? Anyone we can call?" Mara hesitated, fingers tightening around the blanket in her lap. "Not anymore," she said softly. Her gaze dropped to the cracked dashboard. "My parents, they passed years ago." A long silence stretched between them. Hank nodded slowly. "And anyone else? Siblings? Friends?" She shook her head. "I didn't have much of a support system," she admitted. "The man I told you about, Evan, he left me when he found out about the babies." Her voice cracked. "But I'm trying. For them." Hank reached out, placing a steady hand over hers. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "Whatever you need, we'll figure it out." Mara looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the trip began. There was something fragile and hopeful there. As they neared the town, the familiar sights of storefronts and parked cars appeared. The world felt larger now, both daunting and full of possibilities. Hank slowed the truck, turning onto Main Street. "We'll get you settled," he promised, "and we'll take it one day at a time." Mara nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she felt ready to face it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snowy clearing as Hank stepped back onto the cabin's worn porch. His boots crunched softly on the fresh snow. Inside, the quiet warmth of the fire beckoned. Ruby sat near the stove, bundled in a thick sweater, her cheeks rosy from the cold. Hank crossed the room and scooped her up into a gentle embrace, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "Dad," she whispered, voice soft but sure. He held her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. There was a tenderness in the way she looked up at him. Trust, hope, and a flicker of something unspoken. Hank smiled, his voice low and steady. "Ruby, love isn't a thing you have to earn or keep safe in a box." He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. It's a place, a space inside you, big enough for all the people who matter. Ruby tilted her head, considering his words. Even if they don't live here? He nodded. Especially then. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with a comforting glow. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, a gentle reminder of the world beyond. Hank tightened his hold, feeling the weight of all they'd been through and all that was still to come. "We've got room in our hearts, kiddo," he said quietly, "for anyone who needs it." Ruby smiled, her fingers tracing patterns on his shirt. "Then there's always a place for you too," she said. Hank's eyes glistened as he rocked her gently. In that moment, surrounded by the fading light and the warmth of home, hope felt real, like the first clear note of a song long forgotten. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem so uncertain. The sun hung low over the mountains, casting a golden glow on the familiar cabin nestled among towering pines. 20 years had passed since the storm that changed everything. Ivy stepped out of her car, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. A doctor now, with a white coat folded neatly in the passenger seat. Her eyes scanned the cabin, weathered but standing strong. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of memories and time. Inside, Hank sat in his favorite rocking chair, the lines on his face deeper, his hair more silver. He looked up as the door creaked open. "Ivy," he said, a smile touching his lips. She returned the smile, stepping inside. "I came as soon as I could," she said softly. Hank nodded, gesturing to the worn armchair beside the fire. They sat, the room filled with the quiet hum of familiarity. Ivy unpacked a small medical kit. Her hands were steady, professional, but her eyes held something more: care, concern. "I want to check your heart," she said gently. Hank's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of vulnerability. "It's been feeling off lately," she admitted. The examination was calm but thorough. Ivy listened carefully, her fingers finding rhythms beneath his shirt. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "There's an irregularity," she said. "Nothing urgent, but it needs monitoring." Hank nodded slowly. "I'm lucky to have family close by," he said quietly. Ivy reached out, squeezing his hand. "We're here for you," she assured. Outside, the trees rustled softly in the evening breeze. Inside, time moved gently forward. 20 years later, the cabin remained a place of healing, love, and unspoken promises. The sterile hum of the operating room was a stark contrast to the quiet wilderness of the cabin. Ivy stood beside Hank's hospital bed, her eyes calm but shining with an unspoken resolve. The white walls reflected the harsh overhead lights. But Ivy's voice was soft, steady, a beacon in the clinical stillness. "Dad," she began, using the name that carried decades of unspoken love, "we're about to take a big step." Hank's eyes met hers, a mix of trust and quiet courage shining through the fatigue. "You saved me once," Ivy continued, her fingers gently brushing his hand. "Now it's my turn." She explained the procedure with careful words, a pacemaker to steady the rhythm that had faltered with time. Hank nodded, the weight of the years resting lightly on his shoulders. "It feels like the circle's coming round," he whispered. Ivy smiled, tears glistening just behind her calm gaze. "Because it is." The surgeon's voice broke through, signaling the time to begin. Ivy leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Hank's forehead. "See you on the other side," she whispered. As the machines whirred and the lights dimmed, Ivy held on to a promise that love, like the heartbeat they fought to save, was unending. Outside the hospital window, the trees swayed in a gentle breeze, a reminder that life, like the seasons, moved forward in quiet cycles. And in that moment, a circle was complete. The courtroom was quiet except for the rustling of papers and soft footsteps. Fern stood at the front, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the panel of officials. Beside her, Ruby sat with a stack of documents, her eyes sharp and determined. "This forest," Ferns began, gesturing toward the large windows framing the towering pines outside, "is more than just trees and soil. It's history, it's home." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Our family has lived here for generations, learning from this land, protecting it." Ruby stood, stepping forward with a carefully prepared statement. "We're not just fighting for preservation," she said, her voice carrying the passion of youth and wisdom combined. "We're fighting for a legacy, for the future of this community and the children who will inherit it." The officials exchanged glances, the room thick with tension. Outside, a group of townspeople gathered, holding signs and whispering words of support. Fern caught Ruby's eye and nodded, a silent pact between two generations united by love and purpose. As the hearing progressed, stories were shared. Memories of quiet winters, the songs of birds, the scent of pine after rain. Each testimony added a thread to a tapestry woven from decades of care. After hours of deliberation, the decision came. The forest would be protected. Cheers echoed softly, tears glistened in eyes both old and young. Fern and Ruby embraced, a symbol of continuity and hope. They had become the voice for those who came before and those yet to come. A reminder that some fights are bigger than one lifetime. The winter morning was crisp and clear, the sky a pale canvas washed with soft light. Hank sat in his old rocking chair on the porch, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. His hands, weathered and slow, rested on the arms of the chair, fingers twitching with memories. The cabin behind him stood sturdy against the snow-laden pines, its windows glowing faintly with warmth. Laughter carried on the cold air, bright and joyful. Ivy, Fern, and Ruby moved through the snow-covered yard, chasing after children bundled in scarves and mittens. The grandchildren's cheeks were rosy, their breath misting in the frosty air as they built snowmen and tossed snowballs. Ruby's daughter, a lively 7-year-old with bright eyes, scooped up a handful of snow and giggled as she threw it playfully toward Hank. He chuckled softly, shaking his head, the sound rough but full of affection. Ivy smiled warmly as she helped a little boy fasten his scarf, the quiet strength of family evident in her every gesture. Fern guided a shy toddler's hands to shape a snowball, her voice gentle and encouraging. Hank's gaze followed them, his heart swelling with a bittersweet mixture of pride and nostalgia. He thought of the long journey the storms weathered, the nights spent by the fire, the fragile beginnings of a family that had grown strong. Each laugh was a thread in a tapestry woven from years of love and perseverance. The porch light flickered as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new stories yet to be told. Hank rocked slowly, eyes closed for a moment, breathing in the cold, the laughter, the life around him. Though age had slowed his steps, it had not dimmed the warmth he held inside. Here, on this porch, surrounded by those he loved, he found peace and hope. The cabin was quiet, wrapped in the soft glow of twilight. The fire crackled low, sending flickers of light across the worn wooden walls. Hank sat alone in his favorite chair, the silver spoon Mara had given him resting on the small table beside him. His fingers absent-mindedly traced its smooth surface. Across the room, the old radio sat silent, its wooden frame weathered by time. Suddenly, the dial clicked. Static filled the air for a moment, then a slow, soulful jazz melody spilled out. The saxophone's warm notes wove through the room, gentle and familiar. Hank's eyes softened. A small smile curved his lips, the first in a long while. He leaned back, letting the music wash over him like a long-lost embrace. The melodies carried memories of laughter, of love, of moments shared by the fire. He closed his eyes slowly, feeling the rhythm pulse through his chest. In that quiet moment, the years seemed to fall away. Only the music remained, a soothing balm for a heart that had weathered storms and loss. The radio's soft glow reflected in his peaceful face. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, Hank breathed out a sigh of contentment. The jazz played on, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The afternoon sun was soft, casting a golden hue over the clearing beside the cabin. Family and friends gathered quietly, their breaths visible in the crisp air. Ruby held a small wooden box carefully in her hands. Inside lay a carved wooden knife, a symbol passed down through generations, crafted long ago by Hank himself. It was a piece of their history, a token of survival, strength, and love. Hank sat nearby in his chair, his eyes steady but misted with quiet emotion. One by one they shared memories, stories of storms weathered, of laughter around the fire, of moments that had shaped their lives. When it was time, Ruby stepped forward with the box. She knelt by a freshly dug spot beneath the tall pine tree, the same tree that had witnessed so many seasons. Slowly she placed the wooden knife into the earth. The soil swallowed it gently, a silent promise that their history would live on. As she stood, the porch light on the cabin flickered to life, bathing the yard in a warm, steady glow. It was as if the cabin itself was honoring the moment. Hank smiled faintly, his gaze lifting toward the glowing light, a symbol of hope, of memories held close and new beginnings yet to come. The family stood together, wrapped in shared silence, feeling the weight and warmth of what had been and what still was. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the quiet assurance that love endures. And that home is not just a place, but a feeling, a light that never truly goes out. As the fire flickers softly and the night settles in, there's a quiet peace that lingers like a gentle promise that life goes on no matter the storms we face, and sometimes healing isn't about grand gestures, but the small, steady lights we keep burning in our hearts. If this story touched you even a little, consider liking and subscribing. It means the world to us and helps more stories like this find their way to you. Thank you for being here. Take care and keep that light alive.